There has been a lot of content coming out from the Joe Rogan podcast, specifically about military. As I talked about a former Navy SEAL being canceled previously in the last month or so, but also now seeing a new guest, which is Mike Glover, which is a former Green Beret. I'm going to go down his entire thing here so you guys get context of where he's coming from, but I feel like he has brought a level of awareness of corruption that is happening within the military that I think is important, and specifically kind of like the veteran affairs community and what that means. But let's see what he does. On his website here, he says that his background, he says, I'm a former Special Forces that started my career as an 11 Bravo or basic infantryman or 11 body catcher, some people will say, and became a Special Forces 18 Bravo weapon specialist and served 9 combat rotations overseas. He says he served as a sniper, assaulter, JTAC, TSC expert, free fall jump master, and more. Now with this clip here, you know, it is going to get into what I want to talk about, where he talks about the veteran affairs not really understanding what tier 1 assets have done in these different conflicts that have come through.
If you talk to a military guy, and Andy Stump, all these guys that are buddies of mine, when they come out of the military, especially in special operations, they don't want to say they're disabled or they have a problem,
right?
Or they have post-traumatic stress. So I don't know if this is luckily, but I think it's better. TBI, because the symptoms of traumatic brain injury happen to be the same as post-traumatic stress, they could label you as having that. My concern, which is a concern even today, if they label me with PTSD and said, you're 100% connected because you have PTSD, we're going to take away your guns. So the red flag laws and all that scare the hell out of me and a lot of veterans.
What he says here is about mental health. And obviously that's a factor that's always been going around. But what I want to go on to is what is scary about this is we have warfighters that are tier 1 assets that their entire job is pew pew, be good at this, and I think there has to be some inherent interest in that as well. But to just write off, as we did during OIF, OEF, we're sitting here where people are labeled just PTSD left and right. Even my friend Mike Sensi, who's a recruiter now that's been asked a million times if he has PTSD. It's crazy how that has generationally been passed down, and now we have people that are looking at these red flag laws, and they're like, is this going to be an issue? And obviously also the livelihood of these people as well as they leave these units, as many of them go to 3-letter agencies. Many of them are actually going to go do contract work and, you know, do some of the dirty work that the U.S. military is not wanting to do. Let's just be honest. And I find this weird dichotomy with the veteran affairs where he's talking about like this corruption of like, okay, they have the database, they have this information where they're able to say, these are our people labeled with this bad condition, you know, and them actually wanting to get hurt and already having, and one of them wanting to actually get help, and them already having this stigma within the community. But now this would drive it even further. And it's like, do they have to choose help or money or their weapons, or what are they looking to pick from this? And I hope this is not the truth, but there's more to this story as he goes through the podcast.
And I walked into the office, and there was a long hallway, and there were dudes doing construction in the hallway. And I heard a loud bang behind me as I entered the room. And the doctor was looking at me, and I turned around and was like, what was that? And just turned around. Like, you do that to noises, especially bangs. And I turned back around, and she goes, a little jumpy, are we? And I was like, oh, shit. Christ. Like, here we go. And we did the interview, and they asked questions like, have you been in combat? Yes. Have you killed people? Yes. Have you seen dead bodies? Yes. How many dead bodies have you seen? Hundreds. Well, we find that hard to believe. Like,
what?
Straight up.
So they're challenging whether or not a person who's actually been to combat, whether or not you've seen X amount of bodies?
100%.
I find that hard to believe.
100%.
From this, I've heard a lot of people having issues of being able to actually be able to, legitimize their experiences while they've been in combat overseas and things like that, where, it's sad to hear that a guy can sit there from a tier 1 asset, sit down with people and automatically be doubted, automatically be told, that's not really what happened. And I'm like, so then there seems to be a disconnect. And mind you, he's not wrong. There are people that are veterans that work at these places that obviously should have some sympathy or empathy to what people have gone through, to some degree to work in healthcare. But to be automatically doubted scares me for the rest of the veteran population. Also, is this just some honor system? Like, I get Joe Schmo to write for me saying that, he saw me at X, Y, or Z. And there has to be some level of reporting in the system. There are post-deployment health assessments and things like that, 9 months to account for every single exposure is difficult where you're trying to focus doing your job. And the biggest thing I think we can notice from this was the burn pits that have been kind of the biggest issue here over the past couple of years, as we saw Jon Stewart fighting for victims that were not able to actually get help for some of the inhalation issues that they dealt with. And so how can we better report and advocate for service members in order to say you are able to receive resources for this?
It was the most disgusting thing. Like, I almost got up and walked out. That was the psychologist evaluation. When I got my physical eval, it was a gentleman who was a veteran. Most of the guys are veterans. They served in some capacity, so they get it. They understand. But they're used to dealing with shitheads. And I want to be careful because there are guys who suffer from post-traumatic stress. There's dudes who get blown up. There's dudes that go through a lot. But the reality is most people who serve in combat don't do so at what I would call the tip of the spear. They're not in the front lines. They're not involved in continuous combat. They might have one rotation. So most of what they see are people who have maybe gotten blown up, maybe not even been to combat. They have the fear of impending doom has created this trauma inside of them, and then they want disability. And, I'm not judging because some of those guys do. I know some of those guys. But they're not used to a guy who has an experience in combat where they volunteered for it, they wanted it, and they did years of it.
Now, this clip here, I'm going to say I understand. The Veteran Affairs health system is working very hard. I would say there's good people probably in it. There's good, bad. He says that in this podcast. But overall, it's tough because there's a form of bureaucracy that is causing this to happen where people that don't have issues are just looking for free money. But what I'm saying is even before, like you saw that there were, people doubting him. And now I'm like, this probably means there's too much demand on the system. We bit off more than we can chew. We see claims taking forever. We saw people actually taking their own lives, ending it in the parking lot. And this is a human system. This is something we understand that it is going to vet people through. That guy that day decided to listen to Mike Glover, but say one day he's like, nah, it didn't really happen, and kind of moved on, and that was it. And it's tough because, I want to say like he's got the credibility of I was Green Beret, bam. What does this mean for a conventional force guy that really did see something, that might be an outlier as we're moving into this, after OIF, OEF era. So I'm interested to see, and I hope that is not going to be an issue and that there are appropriate resources.
So when I talked to the guy and he physically evaluated me, he's like, move your neck because mobility is a part of the equation. And I couldn't move my neck a certain way. And he goes, I find that hard to believe. You can't move your neck more than that. I'm like, I'm injured. And he goes, well, let's talk about the history of where you've been. And I started lining out my combat time. And he's like, oh, this is different. He goes, well, who'd you serve with? And I was like, I was a Green Beret. Like, oh, okay. So how many years in combat? Yeah, 4 years in combat. Oh, okay, well, this is different. And he almost like shifted and almost apologized to me because he's like, hey, man, I'm used to seeing garbage. But there are places throughout the country that don't give two shits about veterans. They're checking the block. It's impossible to fire a GS. We know that historically speaking. From
GS?
A government service employee. Like the guys who got caught like they were GS civilians and they were doing vacations and all these different things. None of those dudes got fired during all this controversy. Wounded Warrior was involved in some controversy over some stuff. None of these guys in the GS realm, when it comes to veteran affairs, the system, are being held accountable. And so the system's still broken. I mean, I went there recently and was dumbfounded. Every time I go in there, it's depressing because they're not doing a good job. But I would say there's a big discrepancy of understanding of combat, period, and what the top 1% see.
In this part, I'm glad that we have Mike Glover, I would say high tier of the veteran community, advocating that yes, and I should do a whole video on the Wounded Warrior Foundation of the issues that have gone with that because it is a lot of just disgust. I hate it. But there he paints all government service as bad, and I've had my own experiences of good, bad. Just because everyone's a veteran doesn't mean they're a great employee. I'll be honest with you. Even in the military, that's the case. And it sucks because when we look at this bureaucracy feeds itself. Bureaucracy is what is needed, to allow other bureaucracy to occur. And so what you see is this layer upon layer upon layer. And I think that is what our issue is. And I think because the system thrives on that, that is why we're seeing the bureaucracy of people wanting to make fake claims, people wanting to add other layers of red tape. It's just like the more they can do it, the more, corruption can occur or bureaucracy can occur, the more just the system gets kicked down the road. And it's going to need some major rehashing, revitalizing if we're ever expecting to take care of the next war fighter that leaves the service after a massive war, especially if we're talking about like something on the forefront here with China. But we're still seeing years later that the same sentiments are being echoed across social media, across every type of veteran that's been out there. And this is a comment that's a top comment of this Joe Rogan clip that people are still sharing this sentiment today from a tier 1 combat veteran that is still dealing. Dane O. Phelps writes, a total of 56 months in combat at the quotations, the tip of the spear, and I have more PTSD from the VA than I ever got from war. I can't walk into a VA without crippling anxiety. The betrayal is the worst. And that is the most upvoted comment with thousands of upvotes, which means he is speaking some sentiment of truth that the population of veteran community is still feeling this way. And so I'm like, I want to bring attention, and not just for the idea that some politicians are going to ride the backs of this coattail and say, we're going to look good, guys, for the veterans. We're going to make sure we take care of them. Right. Vote for me. Right. And then like turn around and we don't get that. And that just seems to be what this is, kicking the can down the road. This is such a big thing, bureaucratic thing, that I wish I had a solution, but it's almost like let's start from scratch is the only thing I could ever think of. And until then, you're going to have these people that abuse the system, or these people that aren't believed, or X, Y, or Z issues that are flooding through and causing these issues. But I'd love to hear what you guys think. What do you guys think could make it better? Because I think that's where we need to focus our attention to. If you guys like topics like this, hit me up over on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, or down in the comments below. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.